Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. We're multiplying these two together. And you're going to multiply your square roots together. That's how you multiply. You multiply like by like. So 5 times -3 is -15. And then what is 8 times 3? 8 times 3 would be 24. Now, looking at 24, 24 is not a perfect square. But if you look at those pink numbers that I posted in the front of the classroom, they're all perfect squares. Will any of those numbers divide evenly into 24? Looking at those perfect squares, 4. 4 times what is 24? So I want you to break that radical apart to 4 times 6. So then that would give you a -15. The square root of 4 is 2. And then the square root of 6. All right. So now we're just going to multiply our numbers together. And when you multiply -15 times 2, your final answer would be -30 square root of 6. Any questions about that one? We got to figure out a way for y'all to go to the bathroom. I'm going to send them. But yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. You know, can't be an everyday thing now. Okay. Some teachers say you get 8 passes per semester. Should I do that? Start counting them. That's what the Spanish teacher does, my bestie. Should I just do that? 8 passes? I'll think about it. All right. So let's go ahead and look at these two. Let's simplify it. 18 is not a perfect square. But look at those pink numbers up there. Which one of those pink numbers can go into 18? 9. 9 times what is 18? 2. So we're going to break it apart. I'm going to keep, this is a -1 right here. So I'm going to keep that -1 there. And then break this apart to 9 times 2. The square root of 9 is 3. That 2 has to stay. And when you multiply those together, you get -3 root 2. So now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to leave that 2 alone. But look at the front. Which one of those perfect squares can go into 8? 4. 4 times what? So 4 times 2. So I'm going to bring this down. So that would be a 2 times 2, square root of 2. And then 2 times 2 is 4. And you have a 4 square root of 2. So the only way you can add 2 square roots together is if, and I don't know if you all remember this from Algebra 2, is if you have the same number under the square root. So do you notice how they both have a 2? Now we can add them together. And in order to add them together, we're going to combine, we're going to add these two numbers. What is -3 plus 4? And that would be your final answer. All right, any questions about question 1 or 2? Let me zoom back out. Yes.
So it's like square root of 4 plus square root of 4 would just be square root of 4.
So that's a good question. So square root of 4 plus the square root of 4. Well, first of all, that's the same as 2 plus 2, but we're going to pretend like that's not that. But what you would do is you would add these numbers together right here. So you would add the 1 and the 2. So it would be 2 square root of 4. That's what I mean. Good question. All right, let's go to our next examples. Oops, hit the wrong thing. Here we go. All right, copy down 3. We're just going to copy them down one at a time because some of them take a lot of space and some of them don't. So let's look at question 3. How do we know that this is multiplication? Nothing between it. So when you multiply, we generally make a box, which I agree with. I like that. I like a box for multiplication. So let's go ahead and fill them in. We got this across the top, this down the side. And we're just going to fill in all 4 squares, and that's it. So before I forget, you have homework due Friday. You have a skills check on Friday. And I'm passing out your study guide on Friday. You got it. Your first test of the semester is a week from today. So, all right. So let's go ahead and fill in this first square. So you have the square root of 5 times the square root of 5. The square root of 5 times the square root of 5 is equal to the square root of 25, because 5 times 5 is 25. But the square root of 25 is what? 5. So what you really have in this square is just a 5. So in this box, we have an invisible 1 right here. We're just going to multiply these two numbers. Take the -2, multiply by 1. What do you get when you multiply -2 times 1? You get -2. And then that square root of 5 is just going to stay. So -2 times the square root of 5 is -2 root 5. 3 times the square root of 5 is 3 root 5. And 3 times -2 is -6. So now that we have our squares, we're going to combine our like terms. So these two here, they're like terms. What do you get when you combine those together? -1. 5 minus 6 is -1. And now we're going to combine these two together. Now, when you combine these two together, though, we can only combine them because they both have a 5 under the square root. But we're really just adding these two numbers together. And when you add those two numbers together, you get a +1 root 5. And that would be your answer. You can also just say -1 plus root 5. All right, any questions about that? All right, let's look at number 4. So we have division. So remember when we did Appendix 7, we talked about how you can't have an I in your denominator? It's the same thing with the radical. You cannot have a radical in your denominator. So in order to get rid of the radical, we're going to multiply top and bottom by the radical. And Tamaya, I might have did it differently when I did that. So I don't know. I think I'm doing it differently, just so you know. There's like two or three different ways to do this one. But I just had this epiphany during 5th period that it might be easier to just multiply it by the 8. So we could simplify the 8 and then multiply it, but I think it's easier to just multiply it by 8. So we're going to, in order to get rid of the square root of 8, I'm going to multiply top and bottom by the square root of 8. Which is going to give you, what is 3 times 8? 24. And then what's 8 times 8? 64. The square root of 64 is 8. So we got rid of our radical. And what's the perfect square that goes into 24? 4 times what? 6. So you get the square root of 4 is 2. And then your last step is to see if you can reduce that fraction. Can 2 over 8 reduce? What is it reduced down to? 1/4. So this is your final answer. And you can put the 1. That's optional. But you can put it. All right. Any questions about that? Yes. What'd you say? Oh, yeah. Thank you. Starting to glitch, y'all. I'm getting a little tired. I always do that at the end of the day. That should be a 4. 2 over 8 reduces to 1 over 4. Thank you. Okay. So let's look at question. Now these 3 go quick. We only have 4 more. We got this one, these 3, and 1 more. The last 2 go fast, but only copy down 5 though, because 5 is going to take a little bit more space than 6. 6 and 7, they don't take any space at all. So in this one, in order to get rid of the square root, I have to multiply by the conjugate, which would be root 2 plus 1 top and bottom. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. Numerator. So for the numerator, I need to take 5 times the square root of 2 plus 1. So there's a 1 right here. So we're going to take that 5 and distribute the 5. See, I'm only multiplying it by that right here, though. I'm not multiplying that 2. That 2 is in jail. It's in a radical. We can't touch it. So when you multiply 5 by the 2 1s, we get 5 root 2 plus 5. So I'm going to put this in the box and save it. And now I'm going to start working on my denominator. Now when we do our denominator, we need to make a box because I'm taking root 2 minus 1 times root 2 plus 1. So let's go ahead and make our box. And fill in all 4 squares. So I'm gonna give you a minute to try to fill in these 4 squares. And then we'll go through it together. All right, so in this first square, what do you get when you multiply the square root of 2 times the square root of 2? Square root of 4. And what's the square root of 4? Just a 2. In this box, we have a negative 1 root 2. And in this box, I have a positive 1 root 2. And the last square, I have a negative 1. These 2 squares are going to cancel because 1 is positive and 1 is negative. So they go away. And the only thing I have left in my denominator is 2 minus 1, which is a 1. So this is my denominator. So we're going to bring these together. Anytime your denominator is 1, we don't really need to include it. So my final answer that I will be looking for when you take your test is just 5 root 2 plus 5. You can put it over 1 if that makes you feel better. You can put the 1 at the bottom if you want to. All right, the next two, pretty simple. They go pretty quick. Go ahead and copy down number 16 if you haven't already. We have two different things happening here. We have a root and we have a power. The denominator, that's my root. And the 2 is my power. So generally we do the root first. So I'm going to start off by taking the cube root of 8. And then I'm going to take whatever I get and square it. So we got to figure out what the cube root of 8 is. Does anybody know? Raise your hand if you know. Don't tell me the answer, but does anyone know what the cube root of 8 is? What number multiplies 3 times to give you 8? 2. So what we really have inside of our parentheses is just a 2. Now we're going to take that 2 and raise it to the power of 2. 2 to the power of 2 is 4. And that would be your answer. All right, I want you all to try to do number 7 by yourself. So you're going to take the root, the 4th root of 16, and then you're going to raise it to the power of 3. And you do have to show your work if you see this on the test. So we got to take the 4th root of 16 and then raise that answer to the power of 3. Anybody know what the 4th root of 16 is? Show me with your fingers. What's the 4th root of 16? It's 2. 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 is 16. So what we really have is a 2. And now raise that to the power of 3. 2 times 2 times 2, and your final answer should be 8. All right, questions? By the time I get to this period, I know I am tired, so I know you all are tired too. All right, we only got one more question, and then we're going to be done for today. I'm trying to figure out which one I want to do. Well, I'll do 9 or 10. I think I want to do 10. Let's do 10. So we're going to end with number 10. Go ahead and copy down number 10. So the one we did yesterday already had a common denominator, but this example doesn't. So the first thing we need to do is figure out what would be our common denominator. So if I have a 2, a 3, and a 6, does anybody know what common denominator I can use for those 3? 6. 2 divides into 6. 3 divides into 6, and 6 divides into 6. So I'm going to do this the long way just in case I have somebody who doesn't remember. So I have x, and then this is a 1/2, and then I have x. I'm just going to write this out because, again, I don't know who remembers how to do this from 4th grade, so I'm going to just explain it. What do I have to multiply by 2 to get 6? 2 times what is 6? 3. So this fraction, I need to multiply it by 3. For this second fraction here, I need to multiply that by 2. And the bottom fraction is already a 6, so I don't need to change it. So when you do that, you get x to the power of 3 over 6 times x 8 over 6 divided by x and then 1 over 6. So now that we have our common denominator, we can simplify it. When you add these two fractions together, you get 11 over 6. And then that's a 1 over 6. And then what do you do with your exponents when you're trying to divide? Subtract them. And what's 11 over 6 minus 1 over 6? 10 over 6. Which, if you left it like that, that would be okay. But you can also reduce that down to x to the power of 5 over 3. And that would be your final answer. I lied to you. It's not your final answer. Sorry, y'all. I don't mean to be a liar. All right, let's go ahead and rewrite this in radical form. So when I write this in radical form, the 3 goes right here. And then I have x to the 5th on the outside. So the reason why that's not my final answer is because it could simplify. How many groups of 3 can I make with 5 people? Show me with your fingers. How many groups of 3 can you make with 5 people? And I'm actually going to do this the long way. If I actually make 5 x's, 3, 4, 5. See, I can make one group of 3, which means I can take out an x, and then I'm left with how many? 2. So your final answer would be this. You have to simplify it if you can. So that's why I was wrong when I said we were done, because we could simplify. All right, now we're at the final. That's our final answer. Okay, y'all. Well, good work, kids. We're going to end there. You should be able to finish homework 4. Everybody has a book.